Welcome to Real People, Real Voices. I'm your host, James Jackson.
And I'm your co-host, Pastor Wayne Moore.
Always a pleasure to host with you.
It is, my brother. We're COVID safe.
Yeah, this is a new set. These
I got a
first
new look
few
here,
shows.
don't we? Yeah, I'm enjoying it, man.
Yeah, and speaking of enjoying things, we're enjoying some wonderful sponsors.
Yeah, we are, and they're still with us going into this brand new year. Tamiko and Associates, Lavinia and Summers, Home of Funerals, Marion County Public Health Department with us. Lee Carcel and Crawley, thank you for the work that you've been doing with us to keep us on the air. And then I think Al Modern Clothing is approaching a year now that he's been with us, Al's Modern Clothing and Shoes. And Northside's been with us for some time, Northside Window, Gutter, and Cleaning. And Fervent Prayer's been with us
From the start.
From the start as Lee Carcel and Crawley and Marion County Public Health. And his place, Eatery, where you can get some good food.
And we're hearing that all these sponsors are they're benefiting.
They're benefiting
People
from
are
the work,
watching and participating.
from the work that they allow us to do for them.
Yeah. And certainly want you to check out our show on YouTube. You can go to WHMB TV 40 and you can watch this show when it's over, as well as other shows that you might have missed. Be sure also to like us on
Facebook. It's a great place. Facebook is a good place if you know how to utilize it the right way.
Yeah.
So go check us out.
Check us out. We've got a great guest coming up. The Reverend Dr. David Green is going to be coming up. We have a lot to talk about. We'll save that for the conversation, so stay with us. We'll be back after these messages. Well, welcome back to Real People, Real Voices. We're joined by Reverend Dr. David Green. Good to have you with us.
Good to be with you. It's always good to be with you great doctors.
Thank you. Certainly you're no stranger to Real People, Real Voices.
No stranger.
Well, I appreciate it, and I see your new set. It looks really good.
Thank you.
Well, you know where it originated from? The round table.
I see the concept.
Yeah, remember the round table concept, and we're going to work with it until we can work with it no more.
It's our COVID safe
It's
set.
our COVID safe, yeah, and we're going to be praying that we can do a fundraiser to get a brand new look.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need that.
Working on that.
Yeah.
Speaking of working on things, you're the president of the Concerned Clergy, as well as one of our lead pastors in town, Purpose of Life, a great church in Indianapolis. Let's talk about, of course, I want to talk about a fair election process here in just a moment, but how important is activism right now?
Pastor Jackson, I believe it's extremely important that people take an active role and not be complacent. There's a lot of things that are being debated, talked about, and so if there ever was a season that you need true advocacy for the voiceless, those that are disenfranchised, clearly it's the generation that we're living in. A lot of major decisions that's going to impact a lot of the future generations is occurring right now, locally, at state level, and nationally.
And it's so important, as you said, that people get involved and stay involved. Sometimes that can be discouraging, depending on which way things go. In your estimation, some of the things that we see happening in the state, some of the things we see happening in the city of Indianapolis, particularly in the city of Indianapolis, and being one of the city fathers, if you will, what is one of the most pressing needs in the city of Indianapolis right now?
Well, economic development in terms of allowing minority businesses a piece of the pie, increasing that is extremely important. As the state and the city becomes more diverse, as you've seen with the recent census data, I think it's very important that not only do you talk about being inclusive, but it is actually practiced where you can see it, and that starts with economics.
To be inclusive.
To be inclusive.
But right now, we're pretty much exclusive. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, we've got a long way to go.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at the various diversity studies that have occurred at the state level and at the local level.
Very poor data.
Yeah, and it's existed for years. So you want to begin to see changes so that the next disparity study doesn't reflect what the previous 2 or 3 disparity studies have shown. And these disparity studies are 5, 10, 15 years apart. And if we look at the most recent ones, they reflect the same thing that happened a decade ago. And that has to shift. That has to change.
Yeah.
In the previous administration, with regard to Indianapolis, we used to hear a lot about the contracts that would go to the minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and so on. And over the last several years, almost 7 years, we haven't heard much about that. When I attended a function that was co-sponsored by Concerned Clergy, the BMA, downtown on the campus of IUPUI, a beautiful hotel there. And those numbers were shared at the time, but we don't often hear about that. Is that an indication that they're not doing very well with making sure there's equality in that area?
Definitely. I mean, obviously, every political person will talk about when they have great success. And I think that in order to change things, we're going to have to be intentional. And so those numbers, good, bad, or indifferent, need to be shared. It needs to be consistent, and it definitely needs to be intentional. That's how you see improvement. When people begin to focus on something and move it to the forefront, and they're going to keep it public and report it, you find ways to improve, because nobody wants to come back and it's going down, it's continuing to go down, because then it generates more questions. And I think we've lacked that intentionality, but it's something in terms of advocacy that we all need to push for in our respective environments, because it needs to be open, and I believe that's how you'll get change.
Yeah.
Well, it used to be when I first.
It used to be.
It used to be, okay.
When I first got involved in community work, because the way I was catechized, you pretty much did everything in the church. And my first experience with community work was the Concerned Clergy. And it used to be where groups like the Concerned Clergy, the Baptist Ministers Alliance, were always involved, particularly when there was a Democratic administration. They were involved in the things that were going on economically in the city, making sure that minority-owned businesses were getting their fair share. And it seems those things have changed. It's my understanding that our present mayor got at least 70% of the electorate. Do you get the sense that when you enjoy that kind of success, that maybe you slip in some other areas?
Oh, definitely. I think that the community becomes complacent. I think people get comfortable. At the same time, in the time frame you just talked about, you've seen the rise or increase of other local African-American officials, like city, county councils, et cetera, board positions. And the community as a whole can become complacent, assuming that the people in place will ensure and that these things are going to happen. And then when nobody's watching, the next thing you know, people get comfortable and it's not really happening. And that's why advocacy is so needed, because you can't make those assumptions. You can't. I think where we failed our community is that people have made these assumptions. We've operated with the assumptions, and we need to hold people accountable, as was going on decades ago, to say, we really want to see these numbers. We want to hear about this. We need a report about it. And you cannot get a free pass because you got a certain percentage of the vote, or we assume because certain people are in certain places when they are of color. Those things are not necessarily equal, that everybody is there committed to the community and committed to doing what's right. People can easily get distracted. I believe they have gotten distracted. And the only way to bring that back is through the voting process and making sure that we hold people accountable. And that's why it's so important that people re-engage in the process.
All right, get re-engaged. And before our break, maybe you can make that appeal to our viewing audience.
Oh, I encourage all the listeners, make sure you're involved because this is not a time for assumptions. These assumptions have gotten us in a bad place.
All right, and we're at the place where we got to take a quick break. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Real People, Real Voices. We're joined by Reverend Dr. David Green, and we're glad to have you.
Glad to be with you, Pastor Jackson, Pastor Moore.
Pastor Green, there was a legislation that has reached the governor's desk. It's about gun permits. There's a possibility in the next few days, weeks maybe, we might be a permitless city as it relates to gun permits. How do you look at that particular situation based on the homicide record of 271 on last year, right at 39 right now, and then we have a bill sitting on our governor's desk that would make our city, our state, permitless. What do you think about that?
Well, I guess I begin with I certainly respect our Second Amendment, but when you consider the Marion County and its 271 homicides for 2021, I would argue that we don't need a permitless to be a permitless city. I would like to have hoped that the legislators, as they have done on other occasions, when they passed or was considering passing a law, would have made it different for Marion County, because there are laws across the state that don't apply to Marion County. I don't see how this bill will help with the violence issue that we have in Marion County that desperately needs to be addressed. Obviously, you know, our communities are impacted by trauma every time that there's either a non-fatal shooting or fatal shooting. So, and this bill will do very little, in my opinion, to eliminate or reduce that pain, and probably will bring on more sorrow and pain and more mental health issues. So I'm desperately concerned about our being a quote-unquote permitless city.
With regard to purchasing a gun or being able to carry it.
Carry a gun on your hip, basically, out.
Because currently you can buy a gun without a permit, but it has to stay at home.
Right.
But it appears where we're moving, you could actually take that gun with you when you leave the house and not have to have a permit to carry it.
18 and over.
18 and over. So do you think the rationale, and I read a little bit about this, do you think the rationale behind this and what I've been reading is people who are quote unquote law-abiding citizens should not have to be punished and should be able to carry a gun or to conceal a gun without having to go through the rigors of getting a permit? And so that was some of the rationale that has been put forth as to why we should be a state with a permit or not having to require a permit to conceal or to carry a weapon.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly recognize that particular argument. But, you know, given mental health issues and other things, I think you need to consider a process. The same way you have to go through a process to drive a car, to get a fishing license. We need to have a process. Now, maybe the process needs to improve. Maybe it needs to be faster. I would concur with that, but I believe that look at all the areas in our society where there is a clear process, and owning a weapon that could be used to destroy the lives of others, it certainly merits having some type of process other than I bought one and now I can carry it on my hip and carry it openly. I mean, I really agree with the superintendent for the state police department, Doug Carter, who was concerned about that. And I'm concerned about officers and stops, et cetera, just in a panic. Things could easily happen and escalate when, everybody, quote unquote, is carrying a gun right on their hip.
So what does that do, or do you know, what does that do for people who have permits? I'm a lifetime permit holder. The process wasn't very rigorous for me. Do you know, does that make all the other permits go away or void, or how does that work?
I'm not sure what's happening with the people who currently have permits. I'm just really concerned about the group that, 18-year-olds who may still be in high school walking around with a gun.
And I can see where that would be of concern. I mean, guns seem to empower people, and not everybody has self-control. It's one thing to have a gun at home, but to have a gun on you and you have a situation, whether it's with police officers or anywhere, what's going to stop a person from
Using that as a first resort.
Yeah.
And when it's just a temptation, right? Rather than, talk it out, you're going
Don't
to be
shoot
more
it out.
quickly to shoot it out. There's numerous times where people have, if they had to go to their car, by the time they went to their car, either they calmed themselves down or somebody helped calm them down. Hey, let's just leave that alone and let it go. Well, in this particular situation, when it's right there readily available, if you don't have that self-control, it's going to be an ugly situation. And then it also involves the innocent bystanders that are around when these bullets go to firing and ricocheting. We don't know who's going to be injured, who's going to be hurt. And we have so much violence already here in Marion County. The last thing we need is anything that would make it easier for that to take place, in my opinion.
That's a good point. I did a study a few years ago where they had teenage boys and they would put a gun, not loaded, but they would put a gun in the room with that teenager versus a teenage boy without a gun present. And what they noticed was the difference in testosterone levels, that just the presence of a gun, it just accelerated those testosterone levels in the young man. So, it's going to be interesting to see how it goes should the governor approve it. If he vetoes it, we'll see what happens with that. But I think, you harden the target with regard to public safety.
Yeah, I think so. I think you got a great point there. I think it should be vetoed. But we never know what's really tied to it, But it should be vetoed. That is nonsense to me, to allow that to even get as far as it has gotten, because it goes back to what you basically said. Young men are going to be acting strange now, that they can,
Well, if the brain is still developing up to 25.
Yeah, you're going to still have some issues.
Yeah. I'm a gun owner. I leave mine at home.
Yeah, I understand.
Right, exactly.
Because we all have a base nature, and you would hope that when you're out in the community that everybody would do what we hope they would do. And I think in some of my reading, in some of these towns that are outside of Indianapolis, smaller towns, rural towns, they don't see it as an issue, and perhaps it's not. But I think when you start talking about a city like ours, or large populated areas, you could be running into some issues.
And we're not seeing gun safety being instituted, practiced, et cetera. All of that is important. I grew up in the country, so I understand hunting, guns, been a part of my life my whole life. But you want to have safety. You want to have responsibility. You just don't want some 18, 19, 20-year-olds who've not gone through any gun safety classes, but are enamored by guns from videos that they've seen or watched, and they get a gun. And it's, the the little smaller gentleman and he's up against a bigger gentleman, he's going to think, well, I'm just going to use my gun. And this is going to be, it has the propensity to be very bad with a lot of bad consequences when you consider the turmoil and pain that's already in many of our communities. I don't see how this is going to help resolve or fix that. I see that potentially adding, because the first time some innocent person takes a bullet, there's going to be a lot of pain in the community. Whatever community that is, it's going to be painful.
Well, thank you, Dr. Green. You've been a great guest. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you all for being with us. We'll be back after these messages. Welcome back. I'm James Jackson.
I'm your co-host, Pastor Wayne Moore.
And I'm your producer, Curtis Baker.
And we thank God for our sponsors.
Yes, our sponsors are Tamiko and Associates, Lavinia Summers Home of Funerals, Marion County Public Health Department, Lee Castle and Crawley, Owl's Modern Clothing and Shoes, Northside Window and Gutter Cleaning, Fervent Care Christian Academy, and His Place Eatery.
We want to encourage you all to support these businesses. We do.
Yeah.
They're great.
Yeah. Dr. Green was phenomenal.
He was.
As he talked about the situations of economic development,
Disparities.
the permitless issue that is has a strong possibility of entering in our state as it relates to gun violence, or guns, and then gun violence as well.
There's currently over 15 states in the country that have that policy in place now. Would you care for I read them?
We got about 48 seconds.
Got 48.
Well, there's Arkansas, Iowa, Idaho, Kansas, Kentucky, Maine, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Vermont, West Virginia, and Wyoming. And I believe today, Ohio was added to that mix.
Wow.
So I'm not sure what's going on.
Yeah.
You know, it's very dangerous in my opinion.
Well, we have to maybe do a show on how it's going with those states.
Right.
So, the ones that have been going a long time.
Yeah.
And look at the differences.
We'll bring Dr. Green back and work with us on that one.
Yeah.
He's available. Just talk about the states. Let's look at the data in those states. And yeah.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We'll see you next time.
Bye, Jeanette.